Hello everyone, so as you know, I am a bit overdue for a review of Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, a book I read over the holidays. But I figured while we're going to be talking about Joe Abercrombie, why not lump some of his other books in here as well? So while we are giving the Best Served Cold, I did want to give a bit of a spotlight to his Shattered Seas trilogy. I have made many review shorts for all of these, but there's honestly a lot more that I have to say. So yeah, we can call this the Abercrombie Quad or something. I don't know. Now, of course, this author is most known for the First Law series, a series I absolutely love and I've been making my way through. But after I read the first trilogy, I noticed that he has another fantasy trilogy set in another world, and this is, of course, The Shattered Sea. Comprised of 3 books, half a king, half the world, and half a war. What sets this one apart from the First Law is, of course, as you could tell, they are much shorter and they're actually for a young adult audience. Like the First Law, they are still dark fantasy stories set in a very brutal world, and they're full of action and politics. Content-wise, it's just toned down a little. The first book, Half a King, follows Yarvi, who is a young boy whose father was just murdered. The issue, though, was that his father was the king, so now Yarvi is the king, but Yarvi is not super well suited for the title, as he's a cripple, in that he has a very disfigured hand, which of course, you know, back in this medieval style time, not something they could really do much about, and not something people would really associate with a successful king. And then to make matters worse, he is taken and sold into slavery. So most of this book follows him as a slave and growing as a character, and it sort of evolves into a Hamlet-style revenge story, as Yarvi is attempting to break out of slavery, make his way back, and get revenge on the people who were responsible for the death of his father. And overall, I thought this was a really solid book. You know, this world it's set in, the Shattered Sea, it's really cool. Not really groundbreaking in any way. It is pretty standard medieval fantasy, but I did enjoy exploring this world through Yarvi, who I thought was a really interesting character because he has a lot of struggles to overcome in this book, and seeing him do so was very satisfying. And while the side characters were not super memorable, there were a couple that I thought added a lot to the story, but I think what makes this book stand out so much was its ending, which was very satisfying and in typical Abercrombie fashion, went in directions I was not expecting at all, and I really appreciated. So I do think this is a really solid fantasy story. It doesn't do anything super special, it's nowhere near on the level of the First Law, but you know, for an intended audience of teenagers, I mean, this is pretty baller. But you see, after reading it, I wasn't sure that we really needed more. And after reading more, I still don't think we needed it. So yeah, as the series continues, it goes in some interesting directions and does some interesting things. I was actually really surprised to see that in the second book, we have a completely different protagonist. Many years have passed now, Yarvi is much older, and while he is still present in the story, most of the spotlight is given to a young girl named Thorn, as her and many others are tasked with traveling across the Shattered Sea to other kingdoms to, you know, gather allies for an upcoming war. And again, this book did have some highlights. Of course, seeing, you know, Abercrombie flesh out this world more was always great to see. I mean, just in general, he is a fantastic writer, so the dialogue was always great, always snappy. These books are all super fast-paced and have exciting action, but the biggest issue here is that I did not connect to Thorn as a character at all. I found her to be rather annoying. She's just this really edgy teenager, and I think the nail in the coffin for me is that Abercrombie decides to do a romance subplot with her. Yes, there's actual, like, YA-style teen romance in this one, and I really started to check out with that because while it wasn't awful by any means, it just wasn't something that I was interested in reading, especially from Abercrombie. And this one also lacks an ending like the first one had that got me really hyped and excited. I did not dislike this book, I just was not really particularly enthralled by it. But because it's Abercrombie, I was still interested to see how he concluded all of this in Half a War. And wouldn't you know it, we once again jump ahead a few years and begin following a brand new main character in Skara, who is a princess whose family was killed, so now she's going over to join forces with our heroes, who are, you know, about to do this giant war. This is a war book, it's mostly fighting, and, you know, it's stuff Abercrombie does very well. It was pretty cool. I also thought Skara Liara was a much more compelling character than Thorn. Thorn is, of course, still in this, but she's not nearly as annoying. Yarvi does appear here too, and he has a role, honestly, closer to someone like Baez in The Blade itself, as sort of just this wise, mysterious figure. And while it's cool seeing how he ended up in this spot, I was a bit disappointed because I kind of would have liked to, follow that journey with him. And that brings up Half a War's biggest issue. You see, while I do think it is a bit better and more enjoyable than Half the World, this is where it really became clear to me that this series should have been much bigger for the story that Abercrombie was trying to tell. We have so many characters here, warring kingdoms, so much stuff going on, but we're not really getting enough time to spend fleshing everything out. So when we get to the finale here, it just feels like a sequence of, one battle after the next with minimal character development, which is what I like to see from Abercrombie because he's so damn good at it. I will say the ending of this book, and I guess ending of the series, was really strong and definitely echoed some elements of The Last Argument of Kings, which is one of my favorite books ever, but it just didn't really hit as hard because we weren't as connected to these characters. And even the characters we had spent a lot of time with, they have changed so much since the last time we spent time with them that it didn't really have that impact. So I do think this series, by the end, definitely felt like wasted potential. There's a lot of great stuff here. I mean, I still think the first book is pretty strong, but I think it just needed a lot more fleshing out and maybe some more interesting characters. If you are an Abercrombie fan, I definitely think these books are worth seeking out, especially the first one and then the others if you're curious. He is still a fantastic writer, and, none of that quality is really lost here. It's more just an issue with, the actual story he was trying to tell and, the time he was given. Because we know what happens when Abercrombie can go all out for like 600 pages. Best Served Cold happens. Oh yes. Oh. So this is the first standalone story in the First Law universe. While it does take place after The Last Argument of Kings and even features some characters that were in that trilogy, its story is mostly self-contained and honestly kind of completely different from everything Abercrombie had done up to this point. As we follow Monza, who is a mercenary at the start of the book working under Duke Orso, who is like a minor character in the trilogy. Her and her brother are like star mercenaries, everyone loves them, they're going around taking forts, killing people, which starts to intimidate Duke Orso a little bit because he fears that they are becoming a bit too popular and they might try to usurp him. So he gets together with a bunch of his buddies and they plot to kill them. So they get him alone, stab him up a bunch, throw him over a balcony, and Benna, the brother, is turned to absolute pulp. Huge mess. And while most of Monza is turned to pulp, in one of the rawest things I've ever read, she doesn't actually die because her brother's mutilated corpse sort of cushioned her fall. Then she is saved and nursed back to health by a mysterious figure and is now absolutely hellbent on whooping Orso's ass. But not just him, the 6 others that also helped coordinate this attack on her and her brother. Thankfully, after all of her adventures, she has saved up quite a bit of gold and has quite a few favors to cash in on. So you know what that means, we're getting the gang back together. Best Served Cold, as you would assume by the title, is a revenge story through and through. 7 people are on Monza's list, and after she gets her crew together, we see how she plans to take them down one by one. And this book was so much fun, man. I love how each section here, each target they have to go about it in a completely different way. Sometimes a sequence might feel like a heist, sometimes it's like a giant battle. This whole ensemble cast here, specializes in different things, so they're always trying new stuff to, kill their target. And the characters are so entertaining here. You have Shivers, who is a Northman who briefly appeared in the previous trilogy, who wants out of this life. Like, he leaves the North to become a better man, but she dangles a ton of gold in his face. It's like, hey, I need some muscle. And he looks at that gold, he's like, fine, what do you need? There's Casca, who was Monza's former ally as a mercenary. There's Morvir, who's a really slimy poisoner. There's Friendly, who's like just this huge giant guy who's very autistic. And of course, Monza is great as well. I love learning about her past. You start the book like always on her side, rooting for her. But as you learn more, you realize that, she might not be the best person ever. And I liked seeing her, backstories of some of these characters, the relationship she forms with them in the present. What's interesting about these characters is, they bring all the skills to the table. But aside from that, they're just so well developed and so rich. And what's so entertaining about this whole ensemble is that no one trusts anyone. They are literally all being held together by Monza's promise of gold. And you can literally never tell when someone is about to get backstabbed. Pretty much no assassination attempt that they go for in this book goes exactly as planned. So like even when there is an end goal in sight, you have absolutely no idea how they're going to end up getting to that point or if they even will at all. And as I've come to expect, the ending was absolutely crazy. Abercrombie is so good at catching you off guard with twists. It was present in the First Law trilogy, present to an extent in Shattered Seas, and here as well, where he will plant all of the seeds for a massive reveal, and he's so good at concealing them. So when I finally got to those final chapters, my jaw was on the floor for most of it. So all around, Best Served Cold was just super excellent, an easy 5 stars from me. Not just because it was a great standalone, because it also further continued to expand the world of the First Law. As I mentioned, this does take place after the Last Argument of Kings, so despite it being standalone, you really still should read it after the first trilogy. As they do reference a lot from that first trilogy, even give away some big spoilers. I don't think they gave away the biggest spoilers, but I still just would not recommend starting here. That being said, I have a fear that a lot of people will soon be starting here. And that is of course because of the recent news that Best Served Cold is actually going to be getting a movie with Rebecca Ferguson as Monza, which is excellent. Amazing casting. Amazing casting. That's crazy. I think the strike sort of slowed down that movie, but I really do hope it gets off the ground and we get a really solid adaptation of Best Served Cold, because I could see this being an excellent movie. And despite this book taking place after the original trilogy, I do think it actually makes more sense to start First Law adaptations here. Because it's a self-contained story that can be told in like one movie or one season of a show, they don't have to make any huge commitments that they might be worried about making, and just in general, I think this story is far more accessible to a general audience than the First Law trilogy. Because the beginning of First Law is kind of slow, and there is just a lot of setup, a lot of build-up, not much plot going on necessarily, whereas this sort of just throws you into it and you immediately get attached to its characters and its story. And you know, if they ever go on to adapt the First Law after the Best Served Cold movie, I mean, you can easily rearrange things to have this take place wherever in the timeline, it doesn't really matter. But like I said, I do think an annoying issue is going to be that a lot of people will probably just be reading this book instead of the trilogy and then accidentally get spoiled on a bunch of stuff. But I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I have high hopes for the movie and I really hope it delivers, because I continue to absolutely love the First Law. And after a quick little Wheel of Time detour, I will be back. I like making these big videos on multiple books, so I think next time I'll be doing The Heroes, Red Country, and Sharp Ends all together as one, so you can look forward to that. Please go read this series, and I'll see you all in the next video.